Hey guys, it's Trafotin. A while back, I did a review on System76's Adder Pro 9. It had some minor flaws to critique, but I thought it was a pretty well-built machine regardless. But what I didn't touch on was, in August, I actually purchased, personally, for myself, a System76 Adder Workstation 3. This massive thing is a gaming machine and really shines as a mobile desktop PC which packs a powerful punch in its graphics cards. My experience with the Adder is really similar to my experience with the Adder Pro, and yes, they also gave me the t-shirt that I'm wearing right now in addition to the other merchandise inside. Overall, I think that if you're able to accept this thing as a portable desktop you can just plant somewhere and use for gaming, video editing, or AI work, it'll completely handle your needs, and that way I would recommend it. But I can't recommend it if you can't stomach a few major caveats, depending on the kind of person you are. Before we dive in, I would like to clarify that I was not sponsored by System76 to make this review. Given what I've just said, it'll probably be very obvious they did not sponsor this review at all. I had to cough up my own money for this computer. The Adder is built as a customizable gaming laptop. One of the selling points to buy a System76 computer is it's a computer that runs Linux with no questions asked. The hardware is also fully user upgradable and repairable. I actually chose to pay extra for 32GB of DDR5 RAM as opposed to the original 16, a 1TB M.2 device as opposed to a 500GB one, and I also upgraded from an NVIDIA RTX 4060 rather than the RTX 4050. Now, as of time of this recording, System76 is soon going to release the Adder Workstation 4, and the Adder Workstation 4 is the upgraded version of this computer with some minor differences here and there. For example, the Adder Workstation 4 uses 14th gen Intel CPUs rather than the 13th gen Intel CPUs. For ports, the Adder Workstation 3 comes with two USB-C ports, one on the back and one on the left side, a Thunderbolt port, an HDMI port, an Ethernet port, a Kensington lock, a micro SD card reader, a headphone jack, a microphone jack, and two USB-A ports, one Type 3 and one Type 2. The screen is a 1080p 144Hz 15-inch display. You can also get a 17-inch one, but I'm also just blind and will accept that I'll never be able to see anything even if it's right in front of me. The keyboard has an RGB backlight, which is completely independent of whatever operating system you choose to run, and the brightness of the screen is quite sufficient in outdoor areas or in areas where you might get blinded by the sun. Like the Adder Pro, the Adder smudges quite a bit with your fingerprints, both on the chassis and on the touchpad, but it doesn't seem to be nearly as bad as the Adder Pro, despite the fact that it feels like it's the same material. It might even be the same material. I think the most compelling thing about the Adder for end users is the computer's customization. You get a ton of RAM, a lot of space, you even get an extra M.2 slot if you want to buy one yourself or if you want to buy it when you purchase your computer. And one of the best things about the Adder is you are able to swap out parts. That's right, no soldered RAM, you can just get a standard screwdriver, open up the back, and no matter what the little stickers inside of your parts say, System76 does not care. You can just go in and modify your system the way you want. Compared to other gaming computers within the same price point, the fact that you're able to go in, replace parts within your machine, not break your warranty doing so, and the fact that this is one of the only machines within its price point to do so is very praiseworthy. But let's talk about price. The total price rounds out to about $1,863 US. It's a very steep price compared to its competition. But one of the things that will make this worth it is these upgrade paths. If you are willing to foot the bill or pay extra, you can get a machine that's much more competitive with storage and RAM than much of its competition. And one of the things that I also want to talk about is System76 as a company, because on one hand, I want to support a company that makes a Linux laptop, and this is actually the primary way you're funding development that System76 does for the things that they maintain for the Linux community. Things like the upcoming Cosmic desktop environment, or even the little upstream changes that they add to things like GNOME, or to the XDG desktop standards, so that they can get things done and make desktop Linux that much better. And this is why I'm going to point out right here that System76 has a lot riding on them, especially because they are a US company. They're the only major Linux laptop manufacturer in the United States. We're not talking about Purism, because Purism is too busy shipping laptops with outdated hardware or refusing to give people refunds over unfinished Linux phones. The other problem is international Linux laptop manufacturers who also give back to development, like Tuxedo and Star Labs. I got nothing against these guys, by the way, except one thing, and it's an issue that's not entirely their fault. But you don't have to thank them for it. You want to go thank your local customs office. But I also want to speak about the reasons why I chose to buy a computer now. This might seem like a weird one, but I actually consider this pretty important if you choose to go out and buy a computer yourself. The first thing that I have is I am a content creator. Oh, here we go again. He's going with the YouTuber spiel. But first off, this means that every other week of my life is consumed recording shopped videos for all of you on a regular basis. Conducting my personal work outside of my home was almost always done on my phone, or what was essentially a glorified Chromebook that now runs Linux. I am always an advocate for desktops purely for customization and control, but I acknowledge that I probably need a more powerful laptop if I need to do things when I'm not at home. The other reason that I chose to upgrade now was because of my aging desktop. My desktop is chock full of hardware which no longer sees security or feature updates. It runs an NVIDIA 1080 Ti, a Kaby Lake CPU, remember those? And has 32 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. But I knew no matter how this situation would turn out, that my System76 Adder would always be a net improvement over my desktop. It's a mobile workstation I can take places, has a literal jump in performance of 7 years, and is fully capable of handling all of my video editing, my content creation needs, and maybe the light work that I need to do every now and again. As of right now, my desktop just sits in a corner and is now my streaming and recording PC. The first thing that I did was I uninstalled pop!_OS and rebuilt my Fedora setup using my scripts. Once again, I am a firm believer in rolling release distributions, and Pop! OS is not. Anything that isn't a rolling release distribution might introduce problems that weren't originally intended by the developers. You know, like say a certain thing which happened to a certain man who gives tech tips on the internet who erased his desktop environment. And if you're not a fan of Fedora, there's actually community support for two other distributions, that being Arch Linux and NixOS. But realistically, even if you aren't using Fedora, Arch Linux, or NixOS, you can pretty much use whatever you want and you'll probably be fine. The keyboard of the Adder has very little flex and actually feels really great. Unlike the Darter Pro, the function keys are actually where most people would expect them and actually support a lot of standard BIOS features like volume and brightness, controlling the RGB lights, killing your webcam, that kind of thing. Although, I do want to comment on killing the webcam. It only disables the webcam, but not the microphone, despite the fact that both of them are the same module. You're probably also going to want to keep it off because it's only 720p and performs like garbage. The bright side though is the laptop has a pretty good hinge and it's also able to be opened with one hand. However, don't expect to be carrying this thing with one hand anywhere because this thing weighs about 5 pounds or 2.25 kilograms, so it's pretty heavy. But this is actually pretty normal with most gaming PCs in this category, so I give them a little bit of a pass here. It's industry standard. The touchpad's slightly off-center, but I wasn't really bothered by this personally. And the speakers lack a range for bass, but they'll generally get the job done. The biggest problem that I have with the Adder, and most gaming machines like the Adder, is fan noise. Even mildly hardware accelerated activities like playing a YouTube video will cause the fans to occasionally rev up at full speed. If you are performing a more complex task like playing a video game, AI work, video editing, the fan will be much louder and much more distracting. Now, I don't have noise canceling headphones, but it's so loud even I can hear it from 2 rooms away in my home. And if you use the Adder as a standard laptop, the Adder accumulates heat like nobody's business. And this is really problematic if you use the laptop in your lap. You can really feel that thing grill your thighs. But one of the things that I question about standards is battery life. Traditionally, Linux on laptops has an abysmal reputation of battery life, and most people will complain about it online. However, I want to comment that my experience of the battery drain on this thing was really bad, because without any tweaks to Fedora or in just using the default systemd power profiles, the battery life was around 4 hours, which is incredibly low. And I figured that I would download the community repo for System76's power management tools, because that's going to help, right? But it didn't. It actually made the battery worse and dropped the battery life down to 2 hours. But then I started reading some reviews for other similar computers, and I found that many reviewers reviewing these computers were complaining about the exact same issues. So I can only surmise this ridiculous battery drain is because of NVIDIA, whose drivers are already really problematic on Linux, never mind sucking away people's battery life on Windows 11. I was able to increase the 4-hour battery life using TLP in disabling the default power profiles, and this bumped the battery up from 4 hours to about 6 to 7 hours, which I will definitely take as an improvement and is more in line with these other gaming laptops. However, System76's firmware has been one of the most problematic things about their computers, and I would argue is very problematic for most users. In my previous review, I mentioned System76 disables secure boot by default, and actively discourages their users from using it, and you also can't password protect your BIOS at all. One of the things that I want to discuss here, which I think is very important to evaluating a computer that not many people talk about, is desktop firmware security. Microsoft has been making lots of strides into pushing their user base to adopt TPM as a secure element, whether that's a device in their motherboard or as a part of a feature in a CPU manufacturer like Intel or AMD. And verified boot is also one of the things that's included in these measures. The other thing Microsoft has done is get other OEMs to implement secured core PCs, which means there's a lot of extra measures built into your computer that make sure that when you turn on your computer, nothing malicious turns on when you turn on your computer. And I understand that most users are resistant to things like TPM because of how heavy-handed Microsoft is about it. But the harsh reality is, if you look at a lot of talks from Linux developers, that Linux is really bad about protecting the integrity of your boot processes. The good news is that Linux developers, especially in major spaces like for Systemd and for OpenSUSE Eon, have been pushing their users to adopt TPM by default and are trying to make this process seamless for desktop Linux users so they don't even have to think about it. I'm covering all of this because I believe that System76 needs to be held accountable, because when they assemble your device, they have to configure your firmware and hardware in very specific ways that are often invisible to end users. And one of the things that I think is really hurting end users that is done by System76 is the neutering of the Intel management engine. And I'm going to tread really carefully here because the Intel management engine is not documented very well, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories online about it. But the reality is, the Intel management engine is important to core security features that Intel and Microsoft are using as the building blocks for your device, and are to make your experience as an end user much better. Intel Boot Guard, for example, which is what Intel uses for secured core PCs, requires the Intel management engine to run. And if you go to the hardware setting in GNOME or KDE, it's part of the criteria for you to use Intel Boot Guard so that your Linux hardware can pass its security certifications. The reasoning System76 gives for disabling the Intel management engine is its proprietary garbage that, quote, provides many extraneous features that are generally not usable or useful to end users. And this is the major reason why I've changed my mind, because I condemn this shallow thinking. Secured core PCs and Intel boot card are both features that are critical to the future of desktop computing. What's more frustrating is the documentation of Core, which is the firmware that System76 uses, supports using Intel boot card. And System76 doesn't need to put any extra effort in implementing it. In fact, it's probably more effort for them to neuter the Intel management engine. And I understand for people who are hearing all of this and think I said a bunch of gobbledygook, this might seem kind of minor, and it probably is. So if you don't care, you don't have to listen to this at all. But I think one of the most important things that we need to do is that some of the most reputable laptop manufacturers, like Dell, also owner of Alienware, and Lenovo, make respectable gaming machines that meet these security certifications and standards far better than System76 does. While the management engine is proprietary trash that has the potential to get hacked, I would like to remind everybody that anything that you run on your computer and everything within your computer has the potential of getting hacked. We just need to encourage our Linux manufacturers to support stronger security standards so they can meet the needs of their users, just like their Windows counterparts. I've also went back to my Jarter Pro 9 review and changed the removal of the Intel management engine from being a pro to being a con, because I believe that if a company like System76 is going to sacrifice the future-proofing of our devices and sacrifice the security of their end users in the process, we cannot encourage this kind of behavior. I don't think most people will care about this issue, but I believe that even if you don't understand something, we need to believe in these secure defaults because a lot of Linux developers believe in them and Microsoft believes in them. And because of how many people are looking at it, that's going to be the future building blocks of what makes a more secure computing platform. Let's talk about something much more lighter, performance metrics. The Adder is very well capable of basic tasks like web browsing, development, or just watching videos. I've also discussed DaVinci Resolve's performance on discrete GPUs, and this is the device that I've been testing to test DaVinci Resolve's discrete GPU performance on Linux. And I decided to really test this thing for performance because just watching videos and web browsing tasks isn't really enough to talk about this thing. This thing can easily run the vast majority of indie games and most games in general, but I chose to run some of the toughest games in my library, the three being Cyberpunk 2077, The Witcher 3, and Control. As a gaming laptop, the Adder hit a CPU bottleneck in most games that I played to stress test it, and I did have to bypass a thing in SE Linux to get it working, but in general, even without the bypass, it was very capable of handling any AAA game that you can throw at it with max settings, provided you don't use any ray tracing or specialty NVIDIA features. With Cyberpunk 2077, performance is all over the place with DLSS on quality mode. The frame rate also dips between like 54 FPS and 70 FPS, but it's actually noticeably worse in indoor areas rather than outdoor areas. Probably because there's a little more scrutiny on tiny details like objects in a corner or like a glass of water. Certain locations, like the starting apartment at Mega Building H10, feel pretty well optimized, but then going to other areas of the game that less players would go to do not feel very optimized, and I don't think this is a System76 or Linux problem. This really comes more off as a Cyberpunk problem. With The Witcher 3 Complete Edition, I was only able to run the DirectX 11 version. Using the DirectX 12 version, both with and without ray tracing, the game would immediately crash upon opening the world map in a menu, which in my mind is completely unplayable given you need to use the world map to progress through the game. However, the DirectX 11 version gets a very solid, outstanding 120 FPS with completely maxed settings. With Remedy's control, I was able to play the game with ray tracing at about 70 FPS, but note it's pretty noticeably taxing on the GPU, but in general, playing Control felt a lot more optimized and better than playing any of CDPR's games. Overall, I think the Adder is pretty much able to handle most games that come at it, even AAA releases, so it should be fully capable of handling things like your video editing, your Blender renders, any AI training or work you need to do. It's fantastic at that. After spending 8 months daily driving the Adder, I have very mixed feelings about it. The computer has a few problems, namely in the firmware department, and some of those problems were also caused because of NVIDIA, but I think it leaves me with a more complicated and conflicted relationship with System76 as a whole. I think one of the things that's really commendable about the Adder is the amount of customization, and this is what makes it far more compelling for the people who wish to exercise their right to repair and the longevity of their device. And in that regard, I would say I wouldn't have any regret in buying it. My final verdict on System76 after the last year-ish is if you value a repairable and insanely upgraded computer, System76 will have you covered in spades. If you have no interest in the nitty-gritty of repair and upgrades, perhaps you might be giving a recommendation to a friend who isn't a techie, I would say steer clear of System76. Normal people who use System76 machines miss out on serious security benefits and spend extra money on the ability to upgrade or get new parts, which unfortunately most will never exercise. Minus its battery life and security problems, at the end of the day, I do like this computer, and I'll also freely admit that because of the kind of machine it is, I'm the target audience as a content creator. But the laptop space is also really competitive. You're likely able to buy a similar device from a competing laptop manufacturer for less, as long as you sacrifice those upgrade paths. At this time, I only recommend buying this machine if you are an enthusiast or someone who wants to support the software work of System76, like the Cosmic Desktop Environment or Pop! OS. Unless you are one of those people and you want to exercise your right to repair and upgrading your device, you're probably better spending your money elsewhere. That's all from this video, and I'd like to thank you guys for watching, so why don't you go hit that like button. Hit that like button if you would like to see more from System76, like that spanking new Cosmic Desktop Environment, and also subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, or give me all of your money to recoup the cost for this machine. Thank you for watching. I will see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your week.